Welcome back to Tech Fails. I am your host, and today we are dissecting a body. Not a human body, thankfully, but a metal one. A red, plastic, surprisingly charming metal body that was supposed to change the manufacturing world forever. We talk a lot about technology scandals on this channel. Usually, those scandals involve lies, fraud, vaporware, or CEOs running off to non-extradition countries with millions of dollars. But sometimes, the scandal isn't about malice. Sometimes, the scandal is about hubris. It is about the colossal waste of potential, money, and brilliant engineering on a premise that was flawed from the very start. Today, we are looking at the tragic, expensive, and confusing rise and fall of Rethink Robotics. This is the story of Baxter and Sawyer, the robots that were promised to save American manufacturing. Instead, they ended up being auctioned off for scrap parts. This is how the most hyped robotics company of the decade burned through nearly $150 million and shut its doors overnight. To understand why the fall of Rethink Robotics was such a massive shock, you have to understand the pedigree behind it. This was not a couple of college dropouts in a garage hacking together a drone. This was Rodney Brooks, and if there's a Mount Rushmore of robotics, he is on it. He was the director of the MIT Computer Science and Artificial Intelligence Laboratory, but more importantly to the general public, he co-founded iRobot. You know iRobot because you probably have one of their products vacuuming your cat hair off the floor right now. Brooks helped bring the Roomba to the world. He took robots from science fiction and military compounds and put them in our living rooms. He proved that robots could be cheap, effective, and safe around regular people. So, when Rodney Brooks announced in 2008 that he was leaving iRobot to start a new venture called Heartland Robotics, the tech world stopped and listened. The venture capital money did not just flow, it poured. Bezos Expeditions, Goldman Sachs, and the heavy hitters lined up to throw cash at Brooks. Why did they invest so much? Because Brooks identified a massive gap in the market. At the time, industrial automation looked like giant, terrifying orange arms inside cages. If you walked into a Ford factory, you would see robots welding cars. But these robots were blind, dumb, and incredibly dangerous. If you stood in the way of a KUKA arm, it would not stop because it would move right through you. That is why they were caged. And Brooks looked at this and saw the problem. Small and medium-sized businesses could not afford these robots. They could not afford the cages, the safety protocols, or the specialized engineers needed to code them. Brooks wanted to do for manufacturing what the PC did for computing. He wanted to democratize it. He wanted to build a robot that could work right next to a human. Uncaged, unprogrammed, and unafraid. It was a noble goal. It was the holy grail of automation. And it led to the creation of one of the most recognizable machines in history, Baxter. In 2012, Rethink Robotics unveiled Baxter. And honestly, it was love at first sight for the media. Baxter did not look like a Terminator because it was bright red and stood about human height. But the killer feature was the face. Baxter had a tablet for a head displaying a pair of animated, cartoon eyes. This was not just for show because the eyes were a subtle communication tool. If Baxter was about to move its left arm, the eyes would look to the left. It signaled intent to the human workers standing nearby. It was brilliant design, but the innovation went deeper than just the face. The selling point of Baxter was common sense automation. You did not need to know C++ or Python to run Baxter. You taught it by grabbing its arm and moving it. You literally held the robot hand, guided it to pick up a widget, moved it to a box, and let go. The robot memorized the path immediately. It was plug and play. And the price? $22,000. In the world of industrial robotics, that is insanely cheap. A standard industrial arm could cost $80,000 to $100,000, plus another $200,000 for integration and safety cages. Baxter was the price of a Honda Civic. You could plug it into a standard wall outlet. The hype machine went into overdrive, and Rodney Brooks was on 60 Minutes and the cover of magazines. The narrative was perfect. Rethink Robotics was going to bring manufacturing jobs back to America. Baxter was going to handle the dull, dirty, and dangerous jobs, allowing humans to do the creative work. It sounded perfect. It sounded inevitable. But there was a tiny, nagging problem that the slick PR videos did not show. Baxter was not very good at being a robot. Here is where we get into the technical weeds, and where the roots of this technology scandal begin to show. Traditional industrial robots are rigid. They are built to move from point A to point B with sub-millimeter precision. To achieve this, they use high-ratio gearboxes and incredibly stiff joints. If you push against a traditional robot arm, it feels like pushing against a brick wall. It does not give. That rigidity is what makes them dangerous. If that arm hits a human bone, the bone snaps. To make Baxter safe, Rethink Robotics used a technology called series elastic actuators. Imagine that instead of a motor directly driving the arm, there is a spring sandwiched between the motor and the joint. When the motor turns, it compresses the spring, which then moves the arm. This meant that if Baxter hit you, the spring would absorb the impact. The robot was compliant. It was soft. You could slap Baxter's arm, and it would bounce. It was inherently safe. But in engineering, everything is a trade-off. The trade-off for safety was precision and speed. Because the arms were essentially driven by springs, Baxter was spongy. It shook and it wobbled. When it moved to pick up a part, it did not snap to the location like a laser. It sort of drifted in. It hesitated. Factory owners who bought into the hype got their Baxters delivered and realized the grim reality. Baxter was slow, painfully slow. In manufacturing, cycle time is God. If a human can pack a box in 3 seconds and the robot takes 6 seconds, the robot is useless. It does not matter if the robot costs $22,000. If it halves your production speed, it is costing you money every single minute. Furthermore, Baxter lacked precision and could not do fine assembly. It struggled with small parts. It was great at picking up a large object and dropping it in a bin, but even then, it often missed. There are horror stories from early adopters about this. Companies would set up Baxter to pack boxes, and they would come back an hour later to find Baxter confused, holding a box in mid-air. It would often have a sad expression on its face. Yes, the robot was programmed to look sad when it failed. While that is cute in a demo, it is infuriating when you are a factory manager trying to hit a quota. While Rethink Robotics was doing the media circuit and winning awards, a quiet company from Denmark was eating their lunch. That company was Universal Robots. Universal Robots, or UR, did not have a celebrity founder. Their robots did not have faces. They did not look cute, and they looked like gray industrial tubes. But UR had cracked the code that Rethink missed. UR built cobots that were safe, but they did not use the spongy series elastic actuators. They used advanced software and current sensors to detect collisions. If a UR robot hit you, it sensed the resistance and stopped instantly. This meant the UR robot could be rigid and precise like a traditional robot, but safe like a Baxter. UR robots were faster, they were more precise, they were more reliable, and while they were slightly more expensive than Baxter, they actually did the work. By 2015, the writing was on the wall. Universal Robots was shipping thousands of units. Rethink Robotics was struggling to move hundreds. The market was speaking, and it was saying that cute does not pay the bills, functional does. This brings us to the definition of technology scandals in the corporate sense. It is not just about a product failing. It is about the denial of reality. Rethink Robotics had raised massive amounts of capital on the promise of a revolution. But the revolution was happening without them. They had bet the farm on the series elastic actuator, and the physics just did not work for industrial applications. They tried to pivot in 2015 by releasing Sawyer. Sawyer was Baxter's little brother. It had only one arm. It was smaller, faster, and more precise. It was designed to fix the sponginess issues of Baxter. It was a much better machine. But was it enough? Sawyer was definitely an improvement. It could do circuit board testing and machine tending because it was more rigid, but by the time Sawyer hit the market, Universal Robots had already captured the dominant market share. Rethink was playing catch-up in a market they supposedly created. Furthermore, the reliability issues persisted. There were reports of Sawyers breaking down, needing frequent repairs, and struggling with the dusty environments of real factories. Electronics failed, joints wore out, the company was burning cash at an alarming rate. Developing hardware is expensive. Developing hardware while trying to maintain a massive software stack and a sales team in expensive Boston offices is astronomical. Let's fast forward to 2018. The robotics boom is in full swing. Amazon is buying robot companies. Google is buying robot companies. Automation is the buzzword of the century. Rethink Robotics, the darling of the industry, should have been flying high. They had the brand recognition. They had the famous founder. But behind the scenes, the company was running on fumes. They were desperate for a buyer. They knew they could not survive as an independent entity. The burn rate was too high, and the sales volume was too low. They got close. Reports suggest there was a deal on the table. A larger player was going to acquire Rethink. It would have been a soft landing where investors got some money back and employees kept their jobs. But then, the deal collapsed. Why? We may never know the exact details, but in technology scandals like this, it usually comes down to due diligence. The acquiring company likely looked under the hood, looked at the sales figures, and realized the tech wasn't worth the price tag. The timeline here is brutal. On the 3rd of October 2018, CEO Scott Eckert gathered the staff. This was not a "we need to tighten our belts" meeting. This was a "pack your things" meeting. The company was insolvent. 91 employees were terminated immediately. The doors were locked. The robots were silenced. It was a shockwave. This was the poster child of the collaborative robotics movement. If Rethink could fail, was the whole industry a bubble? The aftermath was messy. It wasn't a graceful exit, it was a liquidation. The intellectual property and inventory were put up for sale. Eventually, a German automation group called the Hatton Group bought the rights to the Sawyer robot. They basically said they liked the software, but would run it like a real business. Baxter, however, was discontinued. So, why is this a technology scandal? Why do we feature this on Tech Fails? Because Rethink Robotics represents a specific kind of failure that is rampant in the tech industry. It is the hardware-software disconnect. Rethink Robotics was run like a software company. In software, you release a minimum viable product. If it is buggy, you patch it later. But in robotics, you cannot patch a loose gear. You cannot software update a spring that is too bouncy. If you ship hardware that does not work, you are dead. Rethink promised a robot that could do everything. They overpromised on the capabilities of artificial intelligence while under-delivering on the basic mechanical engineering. They forgot that before a robot can be smart, it has to be a good machine. They also fell victim to the cool factor trap. Baxter was cool. It looked great on camera. But factory managers do not buy cool. They buy return on investment. There is also the issue of the solution in search of a problem. Rodney Brooks assumed that every small business wanted a robot. He assumed the local pizza shop wanted to automate. But the reality was, for many of those businesses, a minimum wage human worker was still cheaper and more flexible. The market simply was not as big as the venture capitalists thought it was. However, we cannot tell this story without a silver lining. Because while Rethink Robotics failed as a business, Baxter was actually a massive success in one specific area. That area was education and research. If you go to a university robotics lab today, you will likely see a Baxter standing in the corner. Why? Because it was safe. Because it was open source eventually. Baxter became the standard platform for human-robot interaction research. Thousands of PhD students learned to program on Baxters. Papers were written on machine learning using Baxter as the test subject. In a way, Rodney Brooks succeeded. He didn't revolutionize manufacturing in the way he promised investors, but he revolutionized robotics education. He put a safe, complex robot into the hands of thousands of students. So, what is the lesson for us here at Tech Fails? The lesson is that pedigree is not everything. You can have the most famous founder in the world and still fail if your product does not solve a real problem effectively. Rethink Robotics tried to force a paradigm shift. They wanted to force the world to accept spongy robots because they believed it was the safer path. But the world wanted precision. It is a reminder that hardware is hard. As we see more and more AI companies promising physical robots, like Tesla Optimus, we should look back at Baxter. It is easy to make a demo video. It is easy to make a robot wave at a crowd. It is incredibly, excruciatingly difficult to make a robot that can survive the grind of a real factory floor for 10 years. Baxter was a dreamer. It had a face that looked at you with empathy. Maybe that was the problem. In the cold, hard world of industrial capitalism, there isn't much room for empathy. There is only room for efficiency. Rethink Robotics is gone. The HAHN group eventually stopped producing Sawyer in 2022, effectively ending the lineage entirely. But somewhere, in a dusty university lab, a red robot with a tablet face is waking up, ready to help a student learn how to code. And maybe, just maybe, that is a legacy worth having. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this deep dive into the graveyard of robotics, hit that like button and subscribe. We cover the biggest technology scandals and the disasters that shape the tech world. Let me know in the comments if you would trust a robot with a face, or if you prefer the soulless industrial arms. I am Tech Fails, and I will see you in the next one.